There's something kind of unsettling about realizing that a lot of the things that we use every single day weren't actually meant to exist the way that they do now. Like, we grow up assuming that everything has a purpose, right? That someone sat down, had a clear idea, and created something intentionally to improve our lives. But when you actually start looking into it, that's not really how it happened. A lot of the most normal things in your life came from accidents, failed ideas, or people trying to solve one problem and accidentally creating something completely different without even realizing it. And honestly, once you start noticing that pattern, it's kind of hard to unsee it because it makes you wonder how much of the world around you was actually planned and how much of it just kind of happened. Welcome back to Chasing Midnight. If you're new here, I'm Isabel, and I'm here to bring you all things spooky, unnerving, or just downright wrong. If you're not following or subscribed yet, pause and go click that button while I sit here and talk about the dark or weird histories of some of the things that you will recognize from today. So, April 19th is known as Bicycle Day. Matter of fact, this episode is releasing on April 19th. So, happy Bicycle Day! I hope you celebrate today. If you've never heard of it before, though, it sounds like kind of wholesome, right? Like maybe it's about getting outside, taking your bike for a ride, something simple like that, enjoying the fresh air. But actually, it goes back to 1943 when a Swiss chemist named Albert Hofmann, who was just working in a lab trying to develop a drug that could help with circulation and breathing. I mean, he had just normal practical goals to advance medicine, right? During that process, he created a compound called LSD. At the time, it didn't seem particularly useful. It didn't do what he was hoping it was going to do, so he just kind of set it aside and moved on. But a few days later, something strange happened. He accidentally got some on himself and absorbed a small amount of it through his skin. But he started to feel like off. Colors around him looked different, his perception started shifting, and he couldn't really explain what was happening to his body. Now, most people would probably take that as a sign to stay away from it. If it's not doing good things to your body and you feel weird, maybe don't do it. But he didn't listen. And then on April 19th, he intentionally took what he thought was a small dose. And it wasn't. Within a short amount of time, things escalated for Albert. He became dizzy, anxious, disoriented. He was convinced that something was very wrong with him. He needed to leave the lab and get to the comfort of his home. But because this was during wartime, there were restrictions on vehicles, so his only option was to ride his bike. And that ride ended up becoming the first recorded intentional psychedelic trip in history. Hence, Bicycle Day. He later described feeling like he was losing control of his body, like reality itself was breaking down around him, and at one point he genuinely thought that he might be dying. He also became convinced that his neighbor was a witch. So that's just a little fun fact about that. But what's so unsettling about this isn't just the experience itself. It's the fact that he created something that he didn't fully understand. Something that would go on to influence entire movements, entire generations, and completely reshape conversations around psychology and perception. And it all started as a failed experiment. Welcome to the chat, LSD. But that idea of something starting out with one purpose and then slowly becoming something else is something that we have seen over and over again. A really uncomfortable example of this is Lysol. Yeah, Lysol. Today it's just a cleaning product and it's something you spray on your counters, wipe off, something you associate with being safe and sanitary. But originally it gained popularity in the late 1800s when it was used to help fight disease outbreaks like cholera in Germany. By the time the 1918 flu pandemic hit, it was being heavily promoted again as a way to disinfect homes and stop the spread of illness. And to be fair, it did kill bacteria, so at the time it didn't seem completely unreasonable. But then, in the 1920s, the way that it was marketed shifted in a way that I think would be canceled if it were today. Lysol started being advertised as a feminine hygiene product, specifically for douching after having sex, which the ads deemed as medically necessary with no scientific backing at all. But the messaging behind it was awful. It was awful. Ads implied that if a woman's marriage was struggling, if her husband was losing interest, that the problem was her, and that using Lysol could somehow fix that. Literally saying lines like, instead of blaming him if married love begins to cool, she should question herself. What? So not only was it built on this really manipulative, sexist idea, but the product itself was dangerous. Early formulas contained a chemical called cresol, which could cause severe burns and internal damage, and women were using it internally. There were documented injuries, and there were deaths, there were lawsuits, and despite all of that, it continued to be sold this way for years after. It was even used as a form of birth control, which also didn't work, surprise. Studies later showed that a huge percentage of women using it that way still became pregnant. So it wasn't just harmful, it was ineffective in the way that it was being advertised. And yet, it was so normalized at the time. And then you start seeing this other pattern, where things weren't accidental at all, right? They were created with very specific intentions that seem necessary once you know them. One of the strangest examples of that shows up in something as simple as breakfast. People like Sylvester Graham believed that human behavior, especially what they considered impure thoughts, could be controlled through diet. His solution was to create extremely bland food, which is where graham crackers come from. Now, this is not the sweet ones with the honey, whatever that we have now, but the original version, which was intentionally plain and unappealing. The idea was that if you removed pleasure from food, you could remove certain urges from the body, especially for boys going through puberty and discovering themselves. That idea didn't stop with him either, though. Later on, John Harvey Kellogg took a very similar approach when he created cornflakes. He believed that stimulating foods could lead to immoral behavior, so he designed something deliberately bland as a part of a controlled lifestyle. And it took off. I mean, both of those things did. So something that now feels completely harmless, it's just a quick breakfast thing that you grab and go, was originally tied to the idea of controlling human behavior in a very literal way. And I wanted to add this next one because not everything comes from ideology. Sometimes things come from something much simpler, like being annoyed and frustrated at your customer service job. Potato chips are the outcome of that. So a chef named George Crumb was working in a restaurant when a customer kept sending back his fried potatoes, complaining that they were too thick for her. After a while, he got irritated and decided to be petty to make a point. He sliced the potatoes as thin as he possibly could, fried them until they were completely crisp, and added extra salt. He was basically trying to make something that the lady would hate so she would just up and leave. He was tired of her. But instead, she loved them, and she requested more. And that one moment, that one little petty moment, is something that's now everywhere. And honestly, chips are my favorite snack, so I'm kind of glad. Thank you, George Crumb. And then we get into things that just shouldn't or didn't work at all. Like bubble wrap. You know it, you love it, you pop it for fun, and it's the core inspiration for a lot of the fidgets that we have nowadays, the little poppets. But it was originally designed to be a new, modern, texturized wallpaper, which already feels like a questionable decision, but this was the 50s, so I'm not going to judge too harshly. I can't imagine. Two inventors, Alfred Fielding and Mark Chavanez, were trying to create a new product to spruce up wall covering, and what they ended up with was plastic sheets filled with air bubbles, because that was hot and poppin'. They tried to sell it that way, but no one wanted it, so they tried to market it as insulation. That didn't take off either, because it just really wasn't too effective. And then eventually someone realized that it was actually really good at protecting fragile items during shipping. Somehow, that failure became one of the most universally recognized and weirdly satisfying things that we still use today. And then there are the ones that are just kind of hard to wrap your head around. Chainsaws are one of those. Before modern surgical techniques, doctors sometimes had to perform procedures during childbirth that involved cutting bone to help deliver a baby safely. Keep in mind, this was before anesthetics were used, so they needed something that could make that process faster and more efficient. So they created an early version of what we now know as a chainsaw. It wasn't electric, it was a handheld wooden mechanism with the chain. It literally had a little turn knob. It was manually turned by the surgeon. And it's not at all what you picture today, but it did serve the same purpose. And the fact that something we now associate with construction or scary movies started in that context is like weird to think about to me. But even things that feel purely aesthetic now didn't start that way. High heels are a good example of that. High heels. Early versions were worn by butchers just to keep their feet elevated off the ground so that they're not stepping in blood and meat and whatever all day. Not that the pain from the heels is much better than stepping in blood, but later they were used by horseback riders to help keep their footing in stirrups. And I'm curious how much harder it was to get off of the horse in those shoes. I don't know. I'll never know. But it wasn't about fashion back then, so it really didn't matter. It was about function. But over time, they became associated with status and power, especially in European courts. Figures like Louis XIV wore them as a symbol of authority, and they eventually turned to like a display of wealth or professionalism. And then now I would say they're like considered a staple. I would think that most girls have at least one pair of high heels. And even the media that we consume has origins that feels goofy once you know them. The term soap opera is actually very literal. I mean, it is what it says it is. These shows were originally created to sell soap in the 30s and 40s. Yeah, I mean, they started off as radio shows. But companies would sponsor the radio dramas aimed at housewives and women who were at home during the day. And the entire purpose of the show was to keep them engaged and entertained long enough to hear the advertisements for their cleaning products. So all the drama, the relationships, the storylines, all of the things were built around selling soap. And eventually that turned into an entire genre. But even something as simple as sunglasses has a completely different origin story than what we use them for now. I mean, early versions weren't really about protecting your eyes from the sun. In ancient China, judges used darkened lenses to hide their facial expressions during court proceedings, so no one could read their reactions or personal opinions. I mean, not everybody has an RBF like me. You are able to kind of tell what somebody's thinking just based off of their facial expression, so this was kind of their way to get around that. And it wasn't about comfort, it was about maintaining control. It was about keeping people from knowing what you were thinking, and it wasn't until later that they were normalized as a little fashion statement or just general UV protection. And I tell you all of these things because when you put them all together, it all seems a little strange. Because none of these things are rare, and none of them are really that hard to get. Some of them might be a part of your daily routine. And they all come from moments where something didn't go as planned, or maybe they went exactly as planned, but the reason feels off now. And somehow, instead of disappearing, they became our normal. So normal that you don't even question them. Well, some of them. I still question the use of heroin as children's cough syrup, but I'm going to save that for another time. If you liked this episode, remember to comment, like, subscribe, and share, because you never know who on your feed would want to hang out with us too. I do want to also add that there will not be a video uploaded next week. My paranormal team and I are heading to Waverly Hills Sanatorium in Kentucky, and we're going to spend the weekend out of town. I will be taking you with me, and I'm going to record everything from beginning to end. It will be a movie-length video in the upcoming weeks. And I may even be doing a TikTok or a Facebook Live, so go follow those so that you can stay notified whenever that does happen. All right. The sun is coming up. It is 5 a.m. We chased midnight. We found it. And now I'm going to get some sleep, finally. Night night, love you.